friends, welcome back to my channel, Life Between Words. I'm so glad that you dropped by today. I cannot believe that it's already May. I am going to talk to you today about what I read in the month of April. I thought I was going to have a better reading month, but I kept wanting to start books before I'd finished them, and so I ended up with just a huge pile of half-read books, and I tried to kind of cram them all in at the end of the month, and it didn't really work. I completed 5 books this month. The first book that I completed this month was, of course, Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. This was obviously a reread for me, and I loved it. So here are some things that struck me on this reread of The Prisoner of Azkaban. Number 1 is Hermione. Hermione always does what she feels is right, even if she knows that Harry and Ron are going to get angry with her. She has so much integrity. She loves her friends, but she's not going to sacrifice what she feels is the right thing to do in order to placate them. And I love that about her. Another thing that really stuck out to me reading the book this time was Snape's vindictiveness. It's not like that's a new concept for me. I know that Snape can be so mean to Harry, but it just really struck a chord with me this time how petty he is and how he holds these grudges, and he takes his hatred of Harry's father out on Harry. It's just so despicable. I know we learn a lot more about Snape, and that's all I'm going to say as the series goes along, but even what we learn about Snape doesn't take away the fact that for the majority of the book, he acts pretty immorally, especially in regards to students. And Snape's vindictiveness is in stark contrast with Lupin's graciousness. Lupin has every reason to be cynical and hate-filled towards the world, but he's not. Although he knows that his lot in life is unfair, he accepts it in a way that is so winsome. He is a very winsome character. Lupin is the anti-Snape. I'm not sure it's ever hit me before just how tragic Lupin's life is, and in spite of that, what a lovely person he is. He might be one of my very favorite characters in the whole series. Those were 3 things that really struck me on this rereading of Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. The next book I read is called The Day the Angels Fell, and this book I read on my Kindle, so I don't have a physical copy of it, but I'll put it right here. The Day the Angels Fell is by Sean Smucker. It's a middle grade novel, and I talked about it in one of my Top 5 Wednesdays, I think. The Day the Angels Fell is about a little boy named Samuel Chambers, whose mother in the first couple chapters of the book dies, and he's left to grapple with her death. In the story, you have Samuel, of course, and his grieving father. You also have his best friend, Abra, who comes into the story a lot as well. Along with those more familiar characters, family and friends, you also have these 2 men who sort of show up in town, and they are pretty strange, and they seem to be on some sort of quest. And I don't really want to say too much more about who they are, but they play a really integral role. Really, the whole book is about Samuel's quest to defeat death. He would do anything to bring his mother back from the dead, and his willingness to sacrifice the good in order to do that. I found it very poignant and wise. There were so many passages that I pulled from the book because I just found them so deeply profound. And there was a lot of wisdom about the idea that even if we could bring someone back from the dead, should we bring them back from the dead? I really love that this book explored death in a way that felt relatable, but it also brought in some otherworldliness to it. I wouldn't say it felt like a fantasy, it felt more like magical realism. It had that really ethereal quality of magical realism, and it also was clearly based on elements of Christianity. It felt very theological in some ways, and not to say that people who aren't Christians couldn't enjoy the book. It was extremely relatable for, I think, a lot of people, no matter what you believe. I really enjoyed this book. I couldn't give it a full 5 stars because the pacing of the ending was a little weird, and I felt like there were some things that were unresolved, especially between Samuel and his friendship with Abra. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I really am glad that I read it. It was a solid middle grade read, and one that I would feel very comfortable handing to a kid to introduce them to the idea of death. The next book I read was The Lake House by Kate Morton. I did do an author overview of Kate, so I'll definitely link it down below if you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts about Kate Morton in general. I loved this book. It was definitely in my top 3 favorite Kate Morton books. This story follows the Edivane family who, in 1933, on the night of their family's big summer party that they threw every year, the youngest child in the family, Theo, was taken from his crib and disappeared, and no one knew what happened to him. 70 years later, Sadie Sparrow, a detective, finds herself in Cornwall after a messy scandal lands her in Cornwall to stay with her grandfather. She comes across Laneth, which is the name of the house that the Edivanes lived in. She starts to look back on the history of the family and pick up the pieces about this mystery that has gone unsolved, what really happened to Theo. Kate Morton's books are so atmospheric, and I love the atmosphere of these books. The places are characters in and of themselves, and the actual real characters are so fleshed out. I can't say too much because there is a mystery in this book, and I don't want to give anything away, but I loved all the characters. Her writing, as usual, was fantastic, and yes, I highly recommend this book. I'm pretty sure I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars because I love Kate Morton, and if you haven't picked her up, definitely do so. If you want to start with her most recent one, this is it, but otherwise, The Secret Keeper, The Forgotten Garden, check her out. If you like Charlotte Bronte, if you like Daphne du Maurier, who wrote Rebecca, if you liked The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, you probably will like Kate Morton. That's the kind of book that Kate Morton writes. Next, I read a romance book, also on my Kindle. It was called On the Island. I've heard it talked about a few times on Goodreads, and I really wanted something sort of light and summery, and I was actually pretty disappointed in this book, and for a variety of reasons. So the premise of the book is this. A 16-year-old boy who had cancer is traveling to Male to meet up with his parents for the summer. But because he had cancer, he's very behind on his schoolwork. So his parents hired a tutor to travel with him to meet them in Male and to catch him up on his schoolwork. On the way, the plane crashes and the pilot dies, and they are left on this remote island by themselves, having to figure out how to survive. I found the survival aspect of this book really good. It felt a lot like something like Hatchet, where they don't actually know a lot about survival, but they have to figure it out as they go along. But it's also a romance. Before I went into this, I thought to myself, ugh, 16 years old and 30, that's pretty gross. I'm about 30, and so 16 is like that's a kid. So that's pretty gross. But when you read the book, they don't fall in love until he's 18 or 19, and by that time 3 years have passed. They're on an island alone, and there's little to no chance of rescue. And there's a lot of growing up that has to be done. TJ is not a 16-year-old kid. He doesn't have 16-year-old problems. You know, it's almost like what's age to them at that point. So in actuality, that part of the book really didn't end up bothering me that much. All right, so this is a little bit of a spoiler. If you don't want to hear this part, I'm going to put up my hand like this, and when I put it back down, you'll know that you can come back. They end up being rescued off of the island, and when they return to the United States, they're giving a press conference, and the only thing that people seem interested in is whether or not a romantic relationship happened between these two consenting adults at this point, and they find it appalling that this 33-year-old woman and this 20-year-old man are involved in a romance. And I got so angry because if their roles and ages had been reversed, if she had been the one to be 20 and he had been the one to be 34, no one would have blinked an eye. It would have been totally okay. And I just got so angry, and that theme kept coming up over and over and over again in the book, and it really, really tainted my experience. So because of that, what I just talked about, I really ended up not liking the book very much, on top of which the writing was not very good. And, you know, I don't always expect the writing in books that I read to be great, but because I wasn't in love with where the story went, I couldn't give it any more than 3 stars, and I probably shouldn't have even given it 3 stars. It really probably deserves a 2-star from me. I thought it was okay. It's not like it was terrible, and I definitely couldn't put it down. It was a really engaging story. I just got pretty angry with it. So it just wasn't the romance for me. I'm gonna keep trying because I really feel like I like a good romance, and so yeah. And then the last book I finished was The Raven Boys. This is the first book in the Raven cycle. I have jumped on this bandwagon and I am so glad that I did. I loved this book. I loved the Raven Boys. I loved the friendships in this book between the 4 Raven Boys and also between Blue and the boys, and I loved the parental relationships between Blue and her real mother and also sort of the surrogate mothers that she also lives with. All the Raven Boys are damaged in different ways, and I just wanted to take them into my mama arms and give them a big old hug. I thought the story was really unique. I've never read anything quite like this. It took a while for me to kind of figure out what was happening, but once I did, I really liked it, and I'm so excited to see where the story's gonna go. And I also found Maggie Stiefvater's writing to be pretty high quality. I really liked this book. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. And then there were 2 books that I talked about in my April TBR that I started but didn't finish. The first one being Paris, Paris by David Downey. I really am enjoying this book, but each chapter is sort of its own essay, and I'm kind of picking it up and putting it down, reading one chapter here and there, and I kind of like it like that. It's not the kind of book that I just want to plow through. I'll talk more about this when I finally do read it, probably in my May wrap-up. The other book that I'm about 2/3 of the way through in is Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, and I am loving this book. The writing is amazing, the plot is amazing. I feel like even if you're not a fantasy reader, this is a great book because the fantasy elements aren't overbearing, at least in this first book. I am just loving this story, and I just haven't finished it because I'm savoring it. So thank you to Samantha from Novels and Nonsense for pushing this extended series on everyone, because so far it is well worth it. I am really enjoying it, and I will talk about this more at the end of May as well. So that is my April reading wrap-up. I hope that you guys enjoyed watching this. Thank you all for dropping by again today. Please tell me below what some of your favorite books you read this month were. I think my favorites, apart from Harry Potter, because that goes without saying, were The Raven Boys and The Lake House. I will see you all later. Bye. It's about a little boy named... I need to figure out his name.